Welcome to the critique. The material submitted explores the profound ethical contradiction in affirming a law of love while participating in institutions that rely on violence and force. So let's just dive right into the high-level opportunities here.
Okay.
First off, I want to say this piece has some serious intellectual heft. What I really like is just the unrelenting clarity of that central conflict.
Right.
It makes such a strong case for individual responsibility. Highlighting how complexity doesn't resolve the tension. It actually sharpens it. That commitment it's impressive.
It really is. That commitment shines through. But I think we need to talk about managing the reading experience.
Uh-huh.
The relentless density of the ethical argument, well, it occasionally sacrifices the pacing, and I worry prevents the reader from fully, processing these really high-stakes philosophical claims.
I absolutely felt that. That demand on the reader, especially in the opening pages. You dive straight into these huge abstract concepts: coercion, contradiction, the institutional fracture.
Before you have a place to stand.
Exactly. Before you have a solid footing.
And the piece moves so swiftly from that great opening provocation, what if God never required violence, through these really dense ideas without enough of a pause? There's no anchor. That leap from a general principle to this intense analysis of complicity, it's just very demanding. It risks a kind of intellectual fatigue right when you need the reader leaning in.
They feel like they're drowning a bit.
Drowning in ideas before they've even grasped the emotional stakes. Yes.
Okay, so how do we give them that anchor? What's the fix?
I think we need to introduce specific, immediate, modern examples or even just relatable anecdotes much, much earlier in the text.
To ground the abstraction.
To ground it completely. We have to create these moments of visceral connection before we ask them to go back to the deep philosophy. It gives them the fuel for the climb.
Right, it's about managing that cognitive load. So if you hit them with the contradiction masked by role and ritual, you need to immediately show them a person under that mask.
Precisely. For instance, you have this incredibly sharp line later on. Something like, in this division, the same person may forgive an enemy in speech while preparing to kill an unknown stranger in uniform.
That's a great line.
It's a perfect two-sentence distillation of the entire problem. That needs to move up. It takes the abstract idea and attaches it right to a human being.
Yeah, a human being facing this clear internal moral division. That's powerful.
Or think about how you discuss systems that separate action from consequence. You have that magnificent concrete image of a person who pushes a button, signs a paper, repeats a phrase.
And somewhere else, a body is broken.
Yes, that one. Right now, that's buried pretty deep in the analysis. If we move that whole structural mechanism up front, the reader immediately gets the mechanics of, ethical outsourcing.
That image is fantastic because it's so modern and quiet and disturbing. It frames the challenge not as some grand moral failure, but as this bureaucratic, abstracted compliance.
And that structure, start with a concrete, painful visual, then explain the philosophy behind it, that's so much more engaging than just starting with a machinery.
So the examples justify the need for the abstract argument.
Instead of the other way around. Yes, you give them these sharp visual targets early, and that ensures they have the emotional buy-in to follow the deep dive that comes later.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So moving on, I was fascinated by how the material handles counterarguments. The core argument seems to be that this isn't a conflict between nations, but between two ways of understanding life itself.
One that trusts force and calls it realism.
And the other trusts conscience and calls it weakness.
That is the essential framework. But when we transition to defending that position, we run right into the biggest practical objection the reader will have.
The charge of irresponsibility.
Or naivete, yeah. The classic, but what if no one defended the innocent?
Right.
So the material does a great job identifying that counterargument. But to really fully disarm it, the critique needs to showcase the historical efficacy of non-cooperation much, much earlier, and more forcefully.
I see the weakness there. The text sort of addresses it by saying, history does not confirm the fear that the world will collapse. But that rebuttal feels philosophical.
Almost dismissive.
Yeah, instead of being grounded in, actual strategic history.
It risks sounding like a generalization. The defense has to transform that rebuttal from just a moral stance into a proven historical reality and do it sooner. If the skeptics claim only force is realistic, we have to show that non-cooperation is also a realistic, functional strategy.
That's interesting. I wonder, though, if we front-load that whole discussion of non-cooperation's practical impact, withdrawing consent, labor, money, does that risk minimizing the underlying ethical commitment? Focusing on results over moral duty?
That's a crucial tension, you're right. But the goal here is to speak the language of the opposition. The moment someone levels that charge of irresponsibility, they've shifted the debate from ethics to practicality.
And we have to follow them to that ground?
We have to. We have to meet them there and demonstrate that the moral position is also the strategically effective one.
So the suggestion is to elevate that discussion of non-cooperation's strategic impact right after you dismiss the inherited anxiety about chaos.
Exactly. It reframes refusal as a powerful, non-violent strategy, a structural threat, not just some noble personal choice.
Absolutely. When you dismiss the fear that society would collapse, you follow up immediately with your strongest points about how systems weaken when obedience becomes uncertain.
You give them the specific mechanisms of decay.
Instead of just asserting a historical truth, you're explaining the engine of non-cooperation.
We need to name concrete examples that show how it works. Say it directly. Armies disintegrate when soldiers no longer believe in the cause.
Or that governments panic when laws are ignored without violence.
Exactly. Those examples prove that non-cooperation is clarity, and clarity is what institutions fear most. It makes the quiet refusal look demonstrably more realistic than the old anxiety that says force is the only way.
I really appreciate how that lets the text meet the realists on their own terms. You're basically arguing that institutional reliance on force is actually the more fragile, more unreliable position.
When faced with mass moral withdrawal, yes. It shifts refusal from a passive morality to an act of resistance that creates predictable friction. It just strengthens the whole thesis.
That feels complete. Okay, let's turn to the final movement of the piece. I can see what you're striving for in the conclusion, this powerful mandate for change. The section on how institutionalized confusion becomes cruelty is really strong.
Well, the intellectual peak of the whole argument is built around one profound insight, that the true enemy of conscience isn't some external cruelty,
but internal postponement.
Exactly. The gradual widening of that gap between what you believe and what you do.
I agree. That is the most incisive point in the entire piece. It's the actionable mechanism of moral drift.
And yet, that crucial insight is currently placed too late. It deserves to be the definitive climax of the final argument.
So you're saying the conclusion, even though it's insightful, it risks becoming a bit diffuse after repeating the central contradiction so many times?
It does. The contradiction is well established by the end. What the reader desperately needs at that point is the actionable solution, the discipline required to maintain integrity. And that core idea, that evil rarely demands total surrender at once, it asks only for delay, that is the most compelling discipline you offer, but it appears midway through the final section. It feels like a supporting thought, not the ultimate summation.
So the opportunity here is to make the concept of immediacy the structural anchor of the entire final section.
That's the suggestion. We need to clearly position immediacy of refusal as the single practical key. Restructure the conclusion to focus intently on this discipline, contrasting immediacy, refusing now, with the dangerous incremental drift of postponement.
This elevates the idea beyond just act now. It really defines the stakes of the delay, doesn't it? Postponement is dangerous because it gives the mind time to build the rationalizations.
Institutions thrive on that delay. They don't need you to believe in their violence. They just need you to delay rejecting it.
Just long enough for the next paycheck to clear.
Or the next promotion to arrive. Or the next justification to be written. The system is designed to exploit that gap between conviction and action.
And by identifying that failure mechanism, you give the reader a powerful internal enemy to fight against. It makes the whole philosophical argument feel relevant to every small daily decision.
To give this a necessary punch, the final section has to emphasize grounding that refusal in time. Frame the mandate around the idea of refusing now before justification has time to assemble its arguments. That's where the power is.
And the final call to action should reflect the ordinary, quiet moments where this decision is actually made, not just grand protests, right?
No, not at all. The small, silent compromises. You have to frame the ultimate question around daily life. In taxes paid without question, in work accepted without reflection, in silence maintained to avoid discomfort.
That brings the whole philosophical text right back to a moment of absolute personal exigency. It gives the reader the concrete tool they need to move forward. It transforms the ending from a summary into a non-negotiable mandate for immediate living.
This shift is huge. It makes the entire piece so actionable. We start by grounding the abstraction, then we establish the defense against the realist critique, and we end with this focused, personal discipline of immediacy. It's a very clean, powerful arc.
I think so.
So, to quickly summarize the key actionable takeaways for you. First, vary the structure with immediate, grounded, visceral examples early on. That's to manage the density and maximize reader engagement.
Right.
Second, integrate those historical examples of non-cooperation earlier and more forcefully. You need to disarm that irresponsibility objective by positioning refusal as a strategic, realistic act.
And third, sharpen that ultimate call to action by elevating the principle of immediacy of refusal. Make sure that profound insight about postponement becomes the absolute climax of your closing argument.
And these refinements, I think, will ensure the material achieves maximum impact. It will move the piece from a powerful critique of contradiction to a non-negotiable demand for coherence.
Which makes the philosophical argument impossible to ignore. This work is formidable. We really look forward to seeing how these adjustments refine its already potent strength. Please feel free to submit your revised material back in for a follow-up.